We've gotten a lot of requests for this one. Coming up, we've covered the great improv songs that became magic, and you loved it. Today, we've got a sister series. We're counting down the top 7 mistakes that turned into gold. Screw-ups that actually resulted in true greatness, some of the greatest songs of all time. We're exposing songs that didn't fail. They exploded after a stumble, a split-second miscue that stuck and became iconic. You're going to hear about a guitarist who blew up his amp and it resulted in the first hard rock song and invented guitar distortion as we know it. Then there was the icon who laughed through a botched intro to his own anthem, and he let out the most famous 3-letter word in rock history. There's also the guitarist who played a wrong note that sounded like a classical music piece, and he turned it into the most played riff by those first learning the guitar. And then, of course, there was the legendary singer who sang the wrong lyrics and created a classic. The anxious moments that made these tracks legendary, coming up on the 7 mistakes that turned into legend. Coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you took your BMX bike off the beaten path to do wheelies and jump ramps, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. I remember there was this field where we created an amp and did that. It was fun. Make sure to subscribe below right now. Click the bell, click the notification button so you know when our stuff's coming out. Well, today we got a great show for you. The kind of stories of the songs that we love. We've done the improv magic shows where, a split decision in the moment turned into true greatness. Like the young soprano who sang a higher octave than the one that was on the sheet music, and it turned the Lion Sleeps Tonight into a classic. But today we're going to take it even further in a sister series where rock stars screwed up in a major way and were rewarded with greatness. The top 7 mistakes that became classic hits altogether. All right, the first track on our episode exposing the top 7 mistakes at number 7, got the insane story of the butchering of an innocent amp by the Kinks on their classic song, You Really Got Me. Girl, you really got me going. So one late afternoon in a London studio back in 1964, the room buzzed with the kind of electric tension that only a room full of amplifiers and ambitious young rockers can generate. And the Kinks were chasing something intense, the kind of rush that makes you willing to gamble on a dare. Kinks lead axeman Dave Davies stood with his guitar tuned for grit, his Vox AC30 already punching out a clean, jangly rhythm that seemed almost too polite for the song that they were trying to pull into life. Across the room, Shel Talmy, the vaunted producer with a keen ear for edge, and the rest of the band just sat there in awe. They were watching. There was this mix of anticipation and nervousness in the air as well. Nervous tension. They wanted a sound that felt dangerous, that snapped at the listener's senses and wouldn't let go. On a whim of impulse, and also a whim of anger and exasperation from trying to find that sound, Dave reached for a razor blade, a reckless tool to alter the voice of the instrument itself, and he slid the blade along the edge of the speaker cone inside the amp cabinet. A crack sounded, then another, and a web of tear lines appeared across the cone. It wasn't a surgical modification at all, because Dave didn't really know what he was doing. He just kind of did it out of anger, and he saw the damage he'd done, and he was like, oh crap, what have I done? He was having a panic attack right there. Fortunately, the master studio mic captured a rogue, distorted sound coming out of that damaged amp. The guitar, it wasn't just playing notes anymore. It tore at the track, a brutal, blistering howl nearly out of control. Now, the band waited in stunned silence for a beat, and then they realized Dave's reckless mistake may actually have turned into something that could not only define the track that they were searching for, maybe even true rock greatness. They felt it. Dave Davies had stumbled onto something distinctive, something that could blast the song into orbit. You got me so I can't sleep at night. The distorted roar that came from the shredded cone of the amp started off as an apparent mistake, to mend. But it ended up being a bold accent to embrace. In that crazy, anxious, raw moment, the Kinks had truly captured a sound that would blaze the trail of hard rock, really the first major hit song to use distortion. The distorted guitar that emerged from that damaged cone demonstrated what rock could really sound like. That's what makes the creative process of making music so interesting in hearing all of these stories through the years. Some of the most revolutionary tracks came from experimentation or moments of frustration like Dave Davies encountered. The loudest truths can come from a beautiful, unpredictable moment inside the walls of a recording studio. And sadly, it just doesn't happen that way anymore because everybody just has beats and they just make it up on their computer. You Really Got Me by the Kinks, though, is widely regarded as a landmark track in rock, often cited as a catalyst for hard rock and garage rock, and it established the Kinks as an international act with a bold, distorted guitar sound. I mean, look at how it influenced Eddie Van Halen, one of the greatest and most innovative musicians of all time, and what he did with it. The Kinks single reached #1 on the UK singles chart, holding the top spot for 2 weeks in 1964. And in the US, You Really Got Me peaked at #7 on the Billboard Hot 100, and nothing sounded like it on radio then. And really for a few years after. Coming in at #6, I've got the Beatles with a mistake by Paul McCartney before the Queen started calling him sir. It's Obladi Oblada. One of those easygoing recording days when the lads from Liverpool were finding their groove, but too loose to expect perfection. They were working on a song with the title Obladi Oblada, inspired by words spoken by a Nigerian conga player named Jimmy Scott. Now, Paul had met Jimmy at the Bag of Nails nightclub in Soho. Paul would always light up when Jimmy would say Obladi Oblada and follow it with the English translation of Life Goes On. It was a big part of his act when he performed in front of a live audience. Now, Jimmy, he was one of those cool cat musicians that was always rolling with the flow. He'd often say, "Life goes on, brah," to his English friends, if not in his native Nigerian. Paul wrote a song based on that expression, the one that Jimmy taught him. He just thought it would be a fun theme to build around and a fun way to approach the next round of recording sessions as they were working on, obviously, the White Album. When the Beatles started to work on Obladi Oblada, Paul was in storyteller mode, playing with the cadence of a verse and not concentrating so much on delivering the correct lyric at that moment. You might say he was following Jimmy Scott's carefree personality, if you wanted to look at it that way. While recording the final verse, though, Paul slipped up and he sang "Molly Lets the Children Lend a Hand," and then he flubbed the follow-up line singing "Desmond Stays at Home and Does His Pretty Face." George and John, they of course caught Paul's mistake, but they were like, this is cool. They loved the goofy charm where the role of the song's characters, Desmond and Molly, were inadvertently flipped at the end. George and John had a good time volleying the lines like arm and leg, turning Paul's mistake into a really fun moment. I mean, you can hear John and George shouting arm and leg in the background of the final version that's, on the White Album if you listen closely. Sir George Martin and the production team looped the tape back, playing over and over again, for the band. The mistaken line seemed to give Desmond a more playful edge and a larger-than-life sense of character. Rather than fix it, they just let the quirk loosen the tune just enough to feel more memorable. By the time they were mixing the accidental line, it becomes so organic, so natural, it sounded perfectly at home in the song. By flubbing up the lyric, singing the wrong one, it made it a classic. Obladi Oblada became iconic gold, even though the track was not a single in the UK, or even the US for that matter. However, it was a single in most of the world, rising to #1 in over 20 countries. So I want to take a moment and mention today's sponsor. You know that one guy in the friend group who hit a crazy 5-leg parlay week 1 and wouldn't stop bragging about it the rest of the season? Yeah, that guy could be you with MyBookie. MyBookie makes it insanely easy to get in on the action. College ball, NFL, super contests, and survivor pools, you name it. All the spreads, player props, and in-game lines you could want all under one roof. And if you're new to MyBookie, you get a little extra juice. Check this out. Use our code ROCK, R-O-C-K, and any bet you choose up to $500 is fully covered. Make your play, and if it doesn't hit, you get it right back when you opt in using your Bet Back bonus token. No better time to jump in, no better place to play. Football's back. Let's make some money with my bookie. Coming in at number 5, I've got the former police trainee turned rock star, Mr. Eddie Money. He messed up on the recording of his signature tune, 2 Tickets to Paradise, and it's great how he did this. I've got 2 tickets to paradise, won't you? Outside, it was a stunning day in LA in the summer of 1977, and the energy in a studio at the famed record plant felt like it could boil over at any second. Eddie Money, formerly one of New York City's finest in training, was in the zone where a singer chases a moment that could lead to an anthem. Now, in its rough form, 2 Tickets to Paradise, it had a catchy, road-ready hook, and that chorus that invited listeners to shout along at the top of their lungs. Everyone involved recognized its potential, but he did something more to make it a shout-along chorus. As the Money Man ran through the chorus, Eddie hit 2 Tickets to Paradise with his signature swagger. But then something happened in the heat of the moment. He drew out the word paradise, stretching it out to paradise, right? Almost theatrical in its length and delivery. It had never been delivered like that before. Eddie was riding high on the phrasing of the chorus, chasing a certain punch to the word that would connect with listeners instantly. In the heat of that one take, the tongue stumbled as the brain raced to catch up with the rhythm and the vibe. I mean, it wasn't a huge mistake by any means, but it wasn't planned. When Eddie did it, everyone looked at each other, wondering how they should react, like he sang it wrong because he'd been singing it the same way the whole time. Was Eddie just messing around, or were they going to roll with it? It changed the chorus because it used to be just 2 tickets to paradise. Eddie, he was also dumbstruck when they stopped the recording. He wasn't sure why he'd done it. He was thinking they would just go back and re-record it the way he'd always done it. But it was an excellent take. And after a discussion, Eddie and the production crew concluded that the dragged out paradise, it gave the chorus a hooky bounce and even more of a sing-along bite, a sing-along feel, something you could latch onto after only one listen. It felt earned. It wasn't manufactured at all. It was that authentic breath that made that chorus feel like a shared declaration rather than a polished jingle. So they used Eddie's take with the elongated paradise, and they sent it in for final mixing and mastering. Now, the next time you listen to 2 Tickets to Paradise, besides what I've shown you on here, try to imagine Eddie Money delivering that part in a different way. I mean, it's hard to do it now because the song is such a staple of American rock radio. It would have been straight staccato, but instead he made it memorable. 2 Tickets, of course, became Eddie's anthem. God rest his soul. With a legacy much larger than his peak position on the Billboard Hot 100, it went to number 22 in '78, but it's definitely one of the greatest all-time hits. Here's what Eddie said in an interview I did with him.
I wrote 2 Tickets to Paradise by myself, and I was taking piano lessons, and I came up with, I got to thank the big guy upstairs because I came up with a great melody line. And I was learning how to play it on piano. It was one of my first songs when I was really getting back into playing piano again. So it took me about 6 months to really be very happy with 2 Tickets to Paradise, but it wasn't commercial enough for Columbia Records in those days. So Jimmy and I came up with Baby Hold On in about 3 days, which we wrote, and that became the first single. Baby, hold on to me. But
I read somewhere
what's more famous now, 2 Tickets to Paradise or Baby Hold On? 2 Tickets to Paradise.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You had written that because you were dating the girl that her parents wanted her to date a...
Well, I was dating a girl from college who used to go home on the weekends, and her mother thought that she was living in a sorority house, but she was actually living with me and paying my rent. And she'd go home on the weekends, and I'd have other crazy girlfriends come over when she was on the weekend. But she was a great girl. But I wanted to take her someplace, and I had no money to really take her to Hawaii or to jump on a plane and take her to New York. But I thought that if we could just take a Greyhound bus up through the Redwoods in Northern California, that was called like 2 Tickets to Paradise. I've got 2 tickets to paradise. It's not the state, it's the state of mind. I mean, 2 Tickets to Paradise would be going to your Aunt Mickey's and having leg of lamb, which your wife can't cook.
Yeah.
It could be anything, But it was a great song, and I'm just so proud of the fact. I've seen it on people's tombstones. I've got 2 Tickets to Paradise, right? Yeah.
Onward with our episode of the top 7 mistakes that turn into gold. So now we're going to get into the happy accident that Ritchie Blackmore made while inventing the iconic riff for Smoke on the Water, coming in at number 4. Smoke. A lot of what's legendary about Smoke on the Water, the fire and sky, isn't planned in a studio diary, but in Montreux back in 1971. The tale goes that the famous riff wasn't hammered out in a formal songwriting session at all. It started as a spur-of-the-moment jam during the Machine Head sessions, with Ritchie Blackmore casually riffing as Ian Pace laid down the groove and Roger Glover jumped in. Ian Gillan has said that the music began as just another riff. They were playing at the first sound check, not really a song at all, and they didn't think much of it at the time. In fact, they didn't rush to publish it. It's actually been said they pulled the jam out later to fill a gap when the album needed more material. Gillan put it plainly, Smoke on the Water only made it onto the album as a filler track because we were short of time, so we dug out the jam and put vocals to it. Thank goodness for rock and roll challenges. There's more color to the origin story too, courtesy of the man, Ritchie Blackmore, when he's been interviewed about the provenance of his simplistic masterwork. I'd love to get an interview with him and talk to him about this. Ritchie has a cheeky, almost myth-making line about where the riff came from. He supposedly hit a wrong note that sounded like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. He was jamming on that for a bit, and then he took that classical song and he reversed and inverted that idea, turning it into the four-note hook you hear on the record. He would say, and I quote, "It's an interpretation of inversion. It's actually Beethoven's Fifth, so I owe Ludwig a lot of money." The upshot is the same though, a spontaneous moment in a rehearsal, not a deliberate composition, giving Deep Purple a riff that would become one of rock's most recognizable tracks, and definitely the first song that every guitarist learns. What made Smoke on the Water's riff so enduring isn't that it was a flawless, pre-planned invention. It was a late-night imperfect moment that became a turning point. A strange note or a stray gesture in that Montreux jam nudged the band into a direction that they hadn't really intended, and what followed was a clipped, urgent hook that felt almost inevitable once it clicked. Now, in the room that night, it wasn't celebrated as a mistake so much as embraced as a spark. Proof that sometimes the magic isn't imperfection, but in how a band learns to ride the moment when the notes go off script. While being a last-minute ad on the Machine Head LP, Smoke on the Water turned into an even bigger surprise for Deep Purple when it became the band's greatest hit, rising to number 2 in Canada and number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1973. And to think they owe it all to some idiot with a flare gun who lit up a casino that started on fire, and then a spontaneous jam, a stray note, that turned into a mimic of a classical masterpiece, which Ritchie Blackmore transformed into a riff that's become, like I said, the one that every kid first learns on the guitar. At least if you were a baby boomer or a Gen Xer or after. You can't make this stuff up. All right, at number 3, our next formidable mistake that was turned to gold is the story behind one of the most famous stutters of the rock era, delivered by Roger Daltrey on My Generation by The Who. Talking about my generation. Now, Roger Daltrey's stutter in The Who's My Generation was a result of him having trouble fitting the lyrics to the song's music during recording, and it wasn't intended to be a speech impediment, but rather an accidental artistic choice. That's about as diplomatic as we can present it. While there are multiple theories as to what led to the stutter, the widely accepted explanation is that Roger Daltrey was improvising and the producer Kit Lambert decided the effect was strong enough to keep. Now Roger, for his part, said the stutter came from trying to sound like a British mod on speed. Just because we could get around. Some folks think the idea was to give the line a built-in way to hint at an expletive in the chorus, the forbidden F word. Why don't you all fade away? Why don't you all fade away? But that's a less common opinion. Producer Shel Talmy called it one of those happy accidents. Rogers also said that he didn't rehearse the song before the session. The lack of rehearsal made him edgy, and then he couldn't hear his own voice in the monitors, is what he said. So the stutter happened as he tried to fit the lyrics to the music as best he could. So he became angry, desperately trying to match the tempo of the song's melody and fit the words in. After they listened back to the take, the band agreed with Shell, and they thought it sounded really cool, fitting the rebellious spirit of the song, even though the official word was that the stutter was completely unplanned. That's why it actually worked. It came from real human emotion. Not hearing himself in the monitor and trying to fit the words to the music, it was the stutter that transformed rock forever and no doubt influenced the other greatest stutter tracks that would follow, like Elton John's Benny and the Jets and BTO's You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet. For sure in the same wavelength.
Benny and the Jets.
With all that said, though, I do have to note, Pete Townshend's demo of the song, before he brought it to the band, has a bit of a stutter in it, making the idea that Roger was struggling with his vocal keeping up with the tempo a semi-weak claim, but it is possible that the stutter became more pronounced due to what Daltrey was facing in the moment.
Just talking about my generation.
As I've found so many times interviewing hundreds of artists, the stories are all different, even with the same four people in the same room. And as they say, when forced to pick between truth and legend, print the legend. But anyway, My Generation by The Who, composed by Pete Townshend, has been referred to as one of the original punk rock songs. It definitely captivated a generation of the rock era, materializing to a number 2 sensation in the UK and Australia, and to number 3 in Canada. But in the States, the song didn't cross over well at all. It stiffed at number 74 on the Billboard Hot 100. But you know what? Who cares? Coming in at number 2, it's a great one that we've never discussed on this channel, centering on Neil Young and his guitar work on the track Cinnamon Girl.
I wanna live with a cinnamon girl.
The famous one-note guitar solo, often blamed on fatigue, is in fact a deliberate and masterful creative choice for this song. While it may sound like a single repeating note, Neil uses a variety of performance techniques to make each pass unique and emotionally resonant. The techniques that Neil used to create a unique sound on Cinnamon Girl were a combination of a whammy bar to bend the note, a varying attack that changed up the song's intensity, and harmonics that were produced by altering the placement of his hands while he played. There's actually a very good reason why many people believe that Neil played a simple one-note solo. It's because he was tired. He was dead tired. He was sick as a dog. Truth is, Neil wrote and recorded Cinnamon Girl, Cowgirl in the Sand, and Down by the River in a single day while suffering from a 103-degree fever. Far from being too tired, it's more accurate to say that Neil was in a state of creative delirium.
Cowgirl in the sand, hello, cowgirl in the sand, is down by the river.
Over the years, listeners have debated whether the solo signals fatigue, genius, or a deliberate minimalist choice. The enduring interpretation is that Neil Young intentionally used restraint and repetition to serve the song's mood. Neil Young actually pushed back against those who labeled Cinnamon Girl solo as a lazy mistake. In his memoir, Waging Heavy Peace, he recounts pulling his guitar from its case near his bed and experimenting with a D-modal tuning, lowering the E strings to D, which yielded a distinctive drone-like timbre. He also notes that when he's sick, his inhibitions fade and his imagination opens up, making it easier to write anxiety-free without resistance. Cinnamon Girl was released as a single in 1970, but struggled to climb beyond the middle of the charts. On the Billboard Hot 100, Cinnamon Girl stalled at number 55. It actually performed best in Australia, moving to number 34. And the reason that I chose it as a mistake, even though it kind of wasn't a mistake, it was a mistake because he was sick. Had he not been sick and in that creative delirium and his inhibitions taken over, he wouldn't have done that. So it was a mistake. So it's debatable, but I think it's interesting because he never quite played a solo like that again. All right, the track I chose as number 1 in the top 7 mistakes that turned into gold is a legend, an icon that was going off the rails until he was rescued by a woman named Sharon, who not only saved his career, but saved his life. Of Of course, I'm talking about Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne.
I'm going off the rails on a crazy train.
Back in 1980, Ozzy Osbourne, the godfather of metal, fresh off his Black Sabbath sacking, launched his solo career. He rode to the studio with two killer players, Randy Rhoads on guitar and Bob Daisley on bass. We've talked about it a million times. But while they were laying down the intro for Crazy Train, Ozzy screamed out, "All aboard," and then he burst into this huge laughter. It was a total goof. He said it as a joke, and it was never meant to be part of the song. But in the end, Ozzy's joke, or his funny mistake, became the stuff of legend. Ozzy's All Aboard command was added to the music track because Ozzy thought it would sound pretty cool. But the laugh, that wasn't planned at all. Then he blurted out the most famous three-letter word in rock history, I. And that was another slip. He was supposed to double that I, but he didn't. So Daisley, he added an extra I as an overdub to keep it from sounding like the pure mistake that it truly was. In the playback, Ozzy told the band that even though he didn't mean to laugh in the intro, he definitely wanted to keep it in there. So in the final version, they added three things to the recording: Ozzy's All Aboard, that sinister laugh, and the echoing overdub of Ozzy yelling, I. One thing that was an intentional part of the music track on the intro is the faint clicking sound when Ozzy busts out his All Aboard command. That sound that you can barely make out unless you're really listening for it, that's a percussion instrument known as a vibroslap. The vibroslap was used to simulate the clicking sound of a moving train. When Ozzy and his carefully recruited band of musicians got together to make Crazy Train and the Blizzard of Oz album, it was an exciting but tenuous period for Ozzy. The reality was that he was damaged goods at that point. Many people didn't want to work with him because of his dangerous drug and alcohol habit, and expectations were not high for his debut album at all. Sharon Arden, who would, of course, later marry the Prince of Darkness, stepped in to steer Ozzy's career, but also his life. After he was ousted from Black Sabbath, she helped him weather a brutal spiral that really should have taken his life back then. Even Ozzy has stated that on many occasions. To a large degree, the solo pursuit for Ozzy in 1980 was an ideal time to take some chances for him, to make some bold, innovative moves. Now, they could have played it straight with Crazy Train. The musical arrangement of the track and the powerful lyric were great on their very own. But splicing up that intro and including Ozzy's mistakes, it gave the song a foreboding, raw intensity that was magnetic to the core rock and metal audience. Man, we all ate it up. What were initially perceived as mistakes ended up helping Crazy Train turn to eternal gold. Crazy Train is the track that energized Ozzy's career to unprecedented heights, made him bigger than Black Sabbath. It's one of rock's all-time staples, an instantly recognizable Ozzy Osbourne track that still rips from the speakers in stadiums and arenas around the world and will continue to. It, of course, exploded again in 2025, hitting the Billboard Hot 100 for the first time and lighting up Spotify streams with well over 800 million streams. Crazy Train has left a lasting cultural imprint, especially as Ozzy wrapped up his era with those final shows he performed before his death. And the biggest mistake of his career, at least in terms of singing lines, the I 3 times will go down as the greatest mistake or screw-up in rock history, sparking a heavy metal revolution that we're still in the middle of today. Ah, how great. Thanks for being with us as we expose the top 7 mistakes that turned into gold. What are your memories of these songs? What other songs should we cover? There's actually about 30 more mistakes that we can do. Would you like to see another part 2? Man, so many great ones out there. Let's have a great discussion below about songs that turned into greatness from mistakes. We'll also do some more improv stuff. I love these stories. They're so fascinating. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.